I welcome you all to the first session of Equinox 2022. Our theme for this year is the expanding frontiers of knowledge, and the first session is titled Academia and the Production of Knowledge. To address this very pertinent issue, we have with us our eminent keynote speaker, Professor K.Muralidhar. Professor Muralidhar is a distinguished biologist of our country. His exceptional work led to the development of the most sensitive RIA for HCG, a pregnancy hormone. He also demonstrated the immunocontraceptive vaccine potential of DS5 HCG beta subunit. His laboratory has developed procedures for indigenous production of pituitary hormones, sensitive immunoassays, and bioassays for these hormones, besides characterizing their physicochemical and immunochemical features. His group has published over 150 articles in peer-reviewed journals and books as chapters. Professor Muralidhar is an outstanding teacher. It was my privilege to be his student during my MSc program. He was a teacher par excellence and inspired many of his students to achieve great heights. Professor Muralidhar was the chairperson of the UGC Curriculum Development Committee for Zoology and brought out a benchmark report on MSc and BSc in zoological sciences. He brought out the new textbooks for higher secondary school biology for NCERT in a completely new format, backed by a sound philosophy. These books are ranked in the top 5 of 750 such books in the world. He has assisted all the funding agencies and served as the Research Advisory Committee of CCMB, IGIB, MRC, to name a few. Professor Muralidhar is an elected fellow of all science academies of our country. That is NASI, Allahabad, INSA, New Delhi, and ISC, Bangalore. He was Sir J.C. Bose National Fellow during 2014 to 16 at South Asian University, New Delhi. He was Jawaharlal Nehru Chair Professor during 2017 to 18 at the University of Hyderabad. I welcome you, sir, to Equinox 2022. Following the keynote address, we have with us Professor Manosh Choudhury. Professor Choudhury is a professor of social anthropology in Bangladesh. He has also taught in programs of literature, architecture, philosophy, photojournalism, media studies, and architecture. A fiction writer in Bengali, he also served as an editor of the first art quarterly in Bangladesh and acted in a few films. A doctorate from Hiroshima University, he later served as a visiting professor here. Chairing this session, we have Professor Savya Saachi from the Department of Sociology, Jamia Millia Islamia. Sir has diverse interests and he has worked in the fields of theory and practice of methods, political ecology, indigenous people, forest dwellers, development, social movements, and craft documentation and conservation architecture. Some of his recent publications include Epistemic Fortitude, Exhausting Times in EPW, Contours of a Discipline, Perseverance, Social Sciences and the World in Social Scientists, in South Asia, Personal Narratives, Social Forces and Negotiations, Water and H2O, Elements of Labor in EPW, and Reverence for Life and Democracy in Leaf Letter, to name a few. I would now request Professor Savya Saachi to take over the session from here. Pavan, can you please unmute, sir?
Thank you very much. Congratulations to Maitri College for having organized this seminar on frontiers of knowledge, which is a very needed discussion because a lot of things are changing in the world and disciplines also growing in response to those changes. We are very privileged to have with us Professor K.Muralidhar, as Brotiti pointed out, a very, very eminent biologist with a philosophical and a sociological perspective. That's very rare to find. And we have also with us Manosh Choudhury, again a very acclaimed scholar in social anthropology. What we'll do is we'll give each speaker at least 20 minutes, Brotiti, is that right? 20 minutes.
Sir, we have half an hour for each speaker, and along with that, we'll have 15 minutes for interaction.
Okay, so half an hour for each speaker, followed by an interaction. Then we have the second speaker, followed by interaction. And if the speakers want to speak one after another and have the interaction at the end, that's equally okay with us. So could I request Professor Muralidhar to kindly make his presentation. His title of the talk is Ethics of Biology Education and the Ethics in Biological Research in India, a Philosophical and Sociological Perspective. I look forward to learning from Professor Muralidhar. Can I invite Professor Muralidhar to come on screen and make his presentation? I will also request students and other people to come on screen because it makes it a little more interactive, a little more human for the speaker to make his presentation. Professor Muralidhar, could you please come on the screen and make your presentation? Is Professor Muralidhar here?
Yes, he's here. Actually, he's having some problem with Pawan. Have you unmuted him?
Yes,
Pawan,
ma'am.
okay.
In the meanwhile, can some more people show up on the screen? Just to help us to understand we are talking to people and not to photographs. Students and fellow teachers, please oblige us by coming on the screen. We need. Is Manosh here as well? Professor Manosh?
Professor Manosh's talk was scheduled later, so I don't know if he's joined.
Achha,
I'll just check.
Ma'am, in the meeting, there is no name like
Professor Muralidhar, has he got the connection?
Actually, sir had joined quite a while ago, but yes, he's
okay.
here.
Welcome, Professor Muralidhar. Can you hear us?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you very much. Thank God. I've been waiting for a long time, and meanwhile, 3 power cuts, and on your side, they were not admitting me. That's okay. No problem. I'll make it faster because I'm running some other workshop here.
Okay, please.
I am near Chennai. Okay.
All yours.
All right. Thank you, Brotati Roy and Principal Mrs. Chopra, for kindly thinking about me. I retired 12 years back. So obviously, they think I am fit enough to give a keynote address now. We will. I will upload the slides now, and I'll quickly run through them because of time constraint. Shall I do that?
Please do, Professor Muralidhar.
Yeah. Okay, upload.
We have with us Professor Manosh also, who has joined now.
Another introduction. Yeah. Full screen.
Yeah, we can see your presentation now.
Okay. The bottom of full screen. It's okay. Can you see the slides?
Yes, Professor
Okay.
Muralidhar.
I'm very extremely happy to address Maitreyi College after a long gap. And as the theme of this seminar, special conference, whatever you call it, is on the observations on higher education trends and the kind of agony and confusion that we are going through, especially in the last decade. So I thought it appropriate to talk about this, but my focus is on biology education, both at the undergraduate level and postgraduate level. And I will quickly go through my observations and see whether we need a rethinking on the not only classification of human knowledge, structuring department centers and other things, and the kind of research programs, PhD programs. I think we need a total repurposing of all these things. Let me see whether I can convince you on this point. Next slide. The pandemic has practically destroyed the education system in this country, but there is a warning here that at least during this time, scientists who are doing their research, they should be honest enough. It is not a time for fraud. It is not a time for thing. We should have serious commitment to honesty and integrity in our research. I'm especially referring to experimental science. I don't talk about sociology or social sciences or humanities. That is for other people to talk. Now, what are these issues of concern higher education, which have been mentioned by many people? Most important is that there is a declining interest in admission into science courses. There is an absence of equity in access to quality education. Everybody knows all these problems, but they are there even in the 75th year of post-independence. Declining standards of teaching science, essentially due to appointment problems. More scary thing, taking over of educational training from mainstream schools and colleges by coaching centers. Many of them have opened their office right at the gate of central universities or main universities. And this is a very alarming trend to an extent that most of us know Professor Kamar was the first Vice Chancellor of Central University of Himachal Pradesh. He made a remark in an article in Hindu that higher education has become higher education. Government itself is hiring all these private people like Baiju and all to come and teach in colleges and universities. This is disgusting and this is very alarming. All of us should protest on these things. Conflict of interest between personal and professional of students, practitioners and preachers of science. Increasing conception of science as an esoteric activity unrelated to daily life. Unmanageable learning burden for students and surprisingly for teachers, because we have stopped the habit of reading books. The dichotomy in the level of joy between doing science and probing science, pursuing science without scientific method, confused thinking and wrong perception of science, especially biology, as an unethical activity. And therefore, our senior most and the best chemist in the country, Professor C.N.R. Rao, had this statement, a damaging statement: India has an examination system, but does not have an education system. Very pathetic, but this is true. That's how Einstein had this, that if you conduct examination unrelated to what has been learned in the classroom, this is what happens. Call all the vertebrates and ask them to climb the tree, and whoever comes first, you give a first class. The poor fish who doesn't have legs cannot climb a tree, which means our examinations have no match with what the students want. It's become an independent activity. Today, I will introduce some of the ethical dimensions to this problem. Professional ethics is what is required in every activity concerned with higher education or school education or any other education. And this is defined as an expected social conduct among the members of a given profession. It may be lawyers, it may be teachers, it may be even robbers. Robbers also have ethical code of conduct. But we should distinguish that ethics is closely related to two other words, moral and law. And we have to know the distinction between this. Moral is something to do with the individual conscience dependent decision on right conduct or right attitude, right behavior. And it has nothing to do with the judiciary or judicial intervention. It's an individual choice. Now, here is an example from biology. These are the Atlantic puffins. They choose their mate for once in life. In vernacular language, we call it Ekapatni Vrata, which means once married, they don't marry again. Now, do we call this moral or biology or ethics or law? On the other hand, there are behavioral aberrations that we come across in all administrative offices, especially now science departments, which is written about here. And for a long time, this was coming under ethical problem, and so nobody was able to take any action. Later, Vishaka laws passed by the parliament after the unfortunate Delhi incident now made it come under so-called law. That means law is something that is passed by the parliament or a state legislature about expected behavior, and any violation will be immediately punished by the appropriate department, and the person also can go to court for any remedial justice. And therefore, law is totally different from moral, and ethics is between moral and law. It is also a voluntary behavior, and we should now see how ethical we are in higher education, teaching, or any other aspect, examination, or any other thing, more so in research, especially for biology. You have heard of innumerable cases of plagiarism in all aspects of publications, guest authorship or ghost authorship. All sorts of things are happening, unethical behavior. To understand all this, we have to look at the history of education. What is that we are doing because of the influence of colonial system? Even choosing a guide, please think and choose a proper guide when you want to start a PhD. There are 4 types of guide, and depending on what is the match between your personality and the guide's personality, you have rock star scientists who publish enormously and in high impact factor journals. On the other hand, you have low impact factor, low number of publications, and also unimportant. And between that, you have the other corners. So the student should do a little bit of research and then choose a proper guide. Because once you choose a wrong guide, your life is gone. Career is destroyed. Please don't do this mistake. These are all ethical aspects. Here is a joke to make you on a lighter vein. One research scholar went up after death, and the fellow Lord Yama is giving him punishment that you should go to hell. But then because you have done a PhD, we will take it as term served. That means doing PhD is an absolute hell. This is the truth. Now, therefore, people talk about all this ethics of science and ethics in science. I'm talking restricting to biology. Please also remember that there is no science of ethics. There is ethics of science or ethics in science, in general in academic venture or activity. And that we should understand properly, because science is also a philosophy which seeks truth. And therefore, if anybody, any activity which seeking truth, then your thought, word, and deed must be honest, and you should show highest level of integrity. And science, experimental science especially, started as a result of colonial rule in 1857, when we started the 3 universities, Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay. And before that, about 20 years before that, 1834, there was a fiery speech in British Parliament by Lord Macaulay. He had ulterior motive in introducing that kind of a system here to manufacture clerks and administrators. But in the process, it led to the destruction of indigenous system. We have ancient Hindu system, Buddhist system, Islamic system, Jain system, and then we got this colonial system or Western system or European system. As a result of that, yes, English became a medium of instruction, but then the large sections of society were not prepared to undergo this kind of a thing. We forgot about all that. And that's the reason why it was taken over by basically middle-class people who had reasonably money in hand. And so our education sector, our research sector, completely dominated by middle class. What does middle class want? How do you define a middle class? Middle class does not want work. They want jobs. And therefore, we'll have to make this stakeholders for science, science is very objective, no doubt about it. I'm not here to talk about philosophy of science, natural science. But scientists are not objective. That's the problem. Science is self-correcting. That's why, unlike religion, which does not correct itself, science which seeks truth, even if somebody has made a mistake, it is self-correcting. It can be corrected and therefore it can be withdrawn. But this is not possible in religion because their revelation is taken as a method. That is not a scientific method. Science is noble, but scientists are not noble. Science is inclusive, but we have seen scientists are not. That is why all these problems, even though Constitution guarantees, we are not seeing it in practice. Science is impartial, fair, but scientists are not. We know the recruitments, appointments, promotions, all sorts of things are unethical things are happening. Science is rational, scientists are not. This is unfortunate. Science is a study, scientists are human. Therefore, we all have our weaknesses. Now, the science that we are pursuing, at least in this India and in all the areas or countries which are ruled by British colonial powers, that science that we do today is an imported one. It started in the Renaissance period in the Europe, first in Italy and then in England. And as a result of this, they wrote a philosophy of natural science, Francis Bacon, and it urged people to pursue science in a way. The most important aspect is scientific method, the way to do an experiment. Now this, through colonial rule, came to all the countries, the rest of the world, including India. And therefore, we call it Western science because Europe is on our west. And today, of course, whatever America does is called, United States does is called modern science. However, this was still descriptive. And therefore, we needed an admonition from a French mathematician, first philosopher of science, this is René Descartes, he's a French fellow, he's a mathematician. And he told us that unless you do experiment, ask a question, and then seek an answer through investigation, you will not understand nature. And then this definition was extended by last century by a British philosopher of science. He's not actually British, he's settled in Britain, he's a Belgian, Karl Popper, who gave us Poppernian logic that ultimately whatever results that science claims should be falsified. Please note the following sentence very carefully. No or non-falsifiable knowledge is not science. Is a typical Britisher, double negative, but don't misunderstand it by making it a positive that science is falsifiable or science is false. It's a very difficult to understand this Poppernian logic. I don't have time to explain to all the young scientists here what is the real meaning of all this. Now, this scientific method is what Francis Bacon told us, and we are supposed to follow. Now, many people have this idea why mathematics is not found in science departments. Mathematical thought is as ancient as any civilization. No truth has survived the test of time as a mathematical truth. Incidentally, the person who told this is not C.V. Raman, it is V.V. Raman. So don't think it is a mistake. We do not understand mental processes. Neurobiology does not tell us the meaning of and how we think. Sometimes we make mistake our brain, and that's how art arises. That is the origin of art. It's a creative act. Accountability in every activity of science research and education is what is necessary. And when we don't follow that, we end up doing unethical things. I'll take one example which all of you are familiar. National Eligibility Test. CSIR started this as eligibility to get some fellowship to do PhD. UGC, another organization, misinterpreted this and said this is the eligibility for lecturership. Qualities of mind required to become a lecturer is completely different from qualities required to become a research student. We have total confusion in this country in the last 40 years. Now, this higher education, which is what a loose word which we are using, what is actually the meaning of this? In ancient India, Sanskrit, they used two terms, Paravidya and Aparavidya. Aparavidya was where you get skills to trade it to get a salary. Whereas Paravidya was something to do with increasing your consciousness to its highest potential to understand life and to realize whatever they call God or anything. Now that Paravidya was the higher education. But today we use this term higher education because you have spent 18 years in school, college and university, and that is called higher education. That means the tertiary education is called higher education. So we should understand all this. However, our universities are supposed to be the breeding ground for such great minds. It is very unfortunate. There are a lot of political interference, and we have destroyed whatever we built before independence. Now, the point is here, therefore, I am restricting my comments to science. The whole taxonomy of human knowledge has completely changed, but our universities, colleges are all ossified, fossilized, because the structure is based on an old concept. Each domain knowledge, they are independently, how they are growing, nobody is watching. And therefore, we don't have multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary areas getting into our syllabus. And that is the problem. Now, therefore, NEP 2020 has made corrections on this. There is much to talk about it, but I don't have time. But one of the major recommendations is that universities should also be multidisciplinary. Each domain knowledge research should be interdisciplinary, and all PhD programs should be transdisciplinary. I don't have time to explain to you all these things. Similarly, Karnataka government appointed a committee in which I was a member. We made recommendations much beyond NEP 2020, how undergraduate science education should be designed and implemented. They have agreed on that, but on 10 model colleges, they will start this and hope the rest of the country will follow this. Now, if you see, I'll speak 2 minutes on science because most people have misunderstanding. And I was told that the audience has humanities and social science people. Measurement is the foundation of science. Science is an art of measurement. This is a quantitative thing. But there are some limitations of science which we scientists also should know, because we claim ourselves to be very logical. But if you ask a very innocent question, have you validated the logic? No. Therefore, a person like Sir Arthur Eddington, one of the greatest astrophysics people, whose quotation you will see in Delhi University Physics Department, Lecture Hall 2, and that says that rational thinking, rational analysis will give us rational solutions to our problems, is a faith. Therefore, we should know the limitations of this science and the scientific method that we are pursuing, and we take so much pride in all that. All right, I don't have time to think. There is only one ethics, and that is the ethics of excellence. All other things are not. In this country, we have aggravated the situation by introducing all extraneous factors. It's a very painful experience that you see in the last 50, 60 years. We have only been having rhetoric on all these things. We really don't have equity. Of course, people will say equity and excellence are not compatible. It is a wrong idea. It can be done. You can have excellence with equity also. There are methods, there are ways of doing. And therefore, I urge all of you to read this book. Ajanta Subramaniam is a professor in Harvard University, and she has written this book very provocatively titled as The Caste of Merit. There is another book which I advise all young people to read, because scientists are very, very inclined to judge science and rank them like great science, mediocre science, and others. But they confuse that great science cannot be or need not be done by great scientists. Great scientists are different, is a different meaning than great science. And therefore, this book, Scientists Greater Than Einstein, very provocative discussion. but those of you who have time, please. Value judgment in science cannot be done very easily. We should leave it to history. So don't judge anything. I will take 1 minute to speak about a very important problem which scientists have raised, and people, ministers, politicians, everybody has been commenting that there is no creativity in Indian science. Now, this is a misunderstanding of the word creativity itself. What science does is tackling problems and solving problems. To solve a problem, you need a convergent thinking. We call it intelligence. You don't need creativity. Creativity is found in technology, in performing arts, in music, in all other such areas. That's why, to prove this point, if I take 10 names from history, you see here, only 2 names come from science, Einstein and Satyendranath Bose, our own Bengali scientist, one of the greatest scientists in theoretical physics. Barring that, the rest of the people are all coming from humanities and social sciences. Lord Buddha, Picasso, painter, Aurobindo, integral yogi, Mozart, a genius, child prodigy. Thomas Alva Edison is a patent maker. He had more than 1,700 patents. He has no degrees. Like Noam Chomsky is a professor of linguistics, also a politician. Isaac Newton and many others. Michelangelo, the Renaissance painter and all. Leonardo da Vinci and all. So what you see here is that they are all creative people. To do great science, you don't need creativity. So this is a misunderstanding of the qualities required to become a good scientist. Normal science, as I said here, requires intelligence. Technological developments, creations, they remain in public memory and they are products of creativity. And that is why we praise technology or technology development much more than basic scientists. We should not ignore this basic science, because it's a nation which ignores basic science. In 20 years, you become a mediocre nation. You cannot develop technology, especially today. It is called a globalized economy, which simply means that you can sell your product anywhere in the world. The market is open. And in that context, therefore, every nation has to develop its own technology. You can no more go to America and bring it in suitcase. It is impossible. I'll have more to talk about it on some other occasion. But right now, please remember, every country has to develop its own technology. Similarly, if you look at research funding, NEP 2020 has also made some corrective measures on this. This is a grave mistake we have done in the last 75 years. People fund individuals. This is wrong, because what you get is academic aristocrats who destroy departments, who don't teach, who don't take classes. So what is important is fund institutions and infrastructure. Do not fund individuals. But our funding agencies have to realize all this. Conflict of interest is a major problem that you see in this country. Not only that, the workers or research people, they go through a lot of dilemmas because of confusing policy statements made by our government or government advisors. Can you see the slide? I don't think.
Yes, we can see the slide.
Okay, but I can't see the slide. Give me 1 minute.
Okay, the slide says conflict of interest. The slide that I'm seeing is conflict of interest.
Yeah, after conflict of interest, it is not moving to the next slide.
Yeah, it is not moving to the next slide.
Yeah, okay, I got it now. Let us see. Yeah.
Okay, it has moved.
Now, I was referring to these research dilemmas which our research students face, and this is because of the confusing policy statements. People have said from government advisors that we should, some years they will say you stick to basic work. I'm talking about science. And some other years they will come back and say you should do applied work, translation work. The ground reality is that the working scientist is confused about all this. Those of you know all these things will remember that we're saying that university people should publish or they will perish. But when Mashelkar became the CSR Director General, he sent out a new policy statement that you should not publish, but you should take patent and increase the GDP of this country. And therefore, we had a new slogan that you patent or you will perish. And promotion policies were also based on that. Now I will say we have very ironical that you can publish, you can patent and still perish. This is ironical in this country. All this is because of confused intellectual analysis of this whole enterprise, which we call science. Now, there are a lot of ethical issues in the pursuit of science. I don't want to spend time on this because I know the time given is only half an hour. There is this animal ethics related to biomedical research. Without doing work on animals, no scientist can discover drugs or medicines for human beings. So animal research is a compulsory component, but then we got the movement in this country. Animals, they have rights, they have all sorts of things. And the people like Maneka Gandhi and all powerful ministers, they came down and said scientists are unethical, they don't know how to handle animal ethics. When I was the head of the Department of Zoology in Delhi University, the same lady threatened me that I will close the department. Of course, I didn't care for a hoot for this kind of thing. But they have destroyed our scientific fabric. There is a conflict here between biodiversity conservation and bioprospecting. There is a craze for career recognition, premature. Scientists have become too greedy for all the awards. And that has led them to take shortcuts. And that is what we see here, unethical practices. Plagiarism of data, results. And of course, computer people have developed software to recognize this plagiarism. But what they don't tell, you can plagiarize a word or a sentence and they will come up and say you have plagiarized. But if I steal your idea, there is no computer software. Therefore, be careful, be honest. That is what is important. We should remember, we should nurture academics and not worry about careers. Publish, patent, and perish, I have already talked. Teaching evolution and creation of life by God, I will skip this point, it's very controversial. Is innovation encouraged in practice? No. However, we shout from top that innovation is most important. That is why Albert Einstein has said, it is a miracle that curiosity survives higher education. That's a telling statement on our science education. I'll skip these points on the impact of Western education. I will only spend 2 minutes on NEP 2020 and the ethical dimensions of this. One thing that I never understand is the paradox of these education commissions. There have been 27 education commissions, starting from Wood's report long back in 1840s. They work like committees. Somebody writes the report and then it goes off. We had great commissions looking into variety of sections of education. Like if you see, some were restricted to sectors. Yashpal Committee, which looked at school education. Ramurthy Commission, which looked at school education. But we had Radhakrishnan Commission and D.S. Kothari Commission, which looked at the whole spectrum. Now, every commission does a mistake. It does not identify what is wrong with the existing thing, then come up with solution. But we have not done anything like that. Therefore, all these commission reports are collecting dust in the government department because they have not diagnosed what is wrong. So many a time, the solution or the treatment is more toxic than the original disease, which is happening in medical practice. And that is what we are doing here. So one should take some time, sit on this. University community of teachers should have roundtable discussion, come up with proper diagnosis, then tell the government that you should do this and that. Simply appointing a commission, for example, this so-called Kasturirangan Commission, it has given a list of 1043 universities that we have. varieties of them, central university, state university, deemed university, many of them are doomed. All sorts of universities are existing. There doesn't seem to be common regulation, common rules, the love for ethics, love for standards. I will also remind most of you that majority of Indian universities were modeled after Oxford or London. Where are Oxford and London universities today, and where are we? That is why in the top 100 institutions of this world, no Indian institution figures, except Indian Institute of Science, but that is not a real true university. And that is the unfortunate thing. I don't have time to discuss what is a great university. All of us should reflect on this. And that is why Professor Kamar has said, higher education has become higher education. And it's a very dangerous policy that government is taking. All right. I already talked about it. Both guide. All right, I'll spend 2 minutes on biology. This is what we call the learning atmosphere, colleges, schools, and university classrooms. And what is the ethical problem here? Both the guide, research guide, and the student should be seekers of truth. Then only you will get ethical conduct of research. Financial support and all incidental problems, then the government should take care. Every worker, every teacher should be paid properly. I know all of you are aware of what is happening in the private sector, especially in areas which are very far from Delhi, the center of power. Horrible it is. Teachers are insulted. Teachers, one of the state government chief ministers, when a vice chancellor of a state university went to meet him, I won't tell the names. Sir, so many positions are there and you are not giving us money and all. You know what this guy told? You hire your professors on daily wages, he said. Can you have a more damaging insult to higher education than this stupid statement from politicians? I think people should realize this seriousness of this situation. Now, when it comes to biology, as I said, if you look at the growth of biology, it has gone in 3 phases. I call it in vivo biology, in vitro biology, in silico biology. Some of you who are biology students and teachers will understand all this. But the time has come to integrate all that, because in the growth of biology in universities, people have simply divided the original department into 10 other departments. And that's what you see, including Delhi University. I'm sorry to say that. There are 10 departments in Delhi University which all claim we are biology departments. Very unfortunate. So the casualty is understanding biology. So we should integrate all these biological subdisciplines. We should integrate biology with other natural sciences, physics and chemistry. And that is what the NEP 2020 has said. You integrate science with the education department. It's very important. In the 4th year of this so-called new course structure, integrate education also to science students. So you get properly science students who want to become teachers, they should get proper training right here and not in separate B.Ed colleges, which has become a racket in this country. And integrate science with technology, because in modern days, doing science itself has become a technologically complex issue. I myself now am shuddering to speak through these microphones and all, because in our days, we used to speak right on the blackboard or green board. It means technology has taken over every aspect of education and research. So we should teach our students properly. All this IT education should be part of every area of biology or physics or chemistry or anything. It should become a compulsory language. All universities, therefore, should reclassify their departments and open, at least to begin with, a center for human sciences where you integrate sociology, psychology, neurobiology, history, economic, anything to do with human affairs, and call it a center and have interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary research areas and tackle new problems so that we can have solution for some of the social problems that the society as a whole is facing. It's a very serious idea. I wish Delhi University deliberates on these things. There is a pathological destruction of university system, work culture by implosion, appointment of mediocre fellows, and by explosion by indiscriminate funding. I think we have to solve all this. I will not talk about job, career, conviction and all. I don't have time. However, let us take some advice from Aristotle. 90% of what Aristotle said is nonsense, but at least for a change, he said this very well. Dignity lies in deserving an honor, not in possessing it. Excellent. Because these middle-class scientists, they're only crazy for awards and recognition. They don't do honest work. And that is the problem. This is a good solution, which Aristotle has said it. We have written some books on this. This is for animal ethics, use of animals in scientific institutions and education. Prakash Tandon, retired neurosurgeon from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Delhi. Myself and Y.K. Gupta is a professor of pharmacology. We wrote this in 2012. It has to be followed by all departments which handle animals. Recently, looking at the kind of unethical things in science research, I have edited another book, myself, Ashok Ghosh, Amit Ghosh and Ashok Singhvi, and it is published by Indian National Science Academy. We have tackled all the problems, ethics or unethical things in science education, governance, as well as research. It is a must read. I hope UGC reads these books. Then only you can have, you should have a 2-credit course on ethics in every department for every PhD program, whether it is social science or humanities or natural sciences, no exception. All right. So here is a telling statement by Richard Horton, the editor of the medical journal, the best medical journal in the world, Lancet. The case of science and scientific literature is that most of the studies are actually fraud. What they're telling is not true. I will not go into detail. It's a very, very damaging statement. I will close it at this because of shortage of time, but I'll be happy to field any questions by anybody, especially students. Thank you, sir. Thank you,
very
Brotati.
much, Professor
Thank you, Mrs.
Muralidhar.
Chopra.
Thank you, Professor Muralidhar. Very, very provocative presentation. Lot of points to think about. And I'm sorry that we don't have enough time to get more of your wisdom and your experiential understanding of the subject. Could you please take the your PowerPoint off the screen, please, so that we can have students on the screen as well?
Yeah.
The floor is open for students to come up and ask questions because that will be very nice. I would request students to kindly ask Professor Muralidhar questions. It doesn't, simple questions are welcome because Professor Muralidhar is a very senior scientist and he will help you to understand little issues that you face in the practice of science. So could I request students to please come forward and ask questions? Students, Gayatri Pani, yes, Gayatri. Can you come on screen?
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. Can you come on screen when you're asking the question?
Yes, sir.
So we have 3 questions for you, Professor Muralidhar, Gayatri, Ojaswini, and Jyoti. So let's have Gayatri first.
Sir, the video cannot be enabled
That's okay. Continue with your question.
Okay, sir. Sir, my question is that what are the probable reasons because of which lack of scientific temperament is observed in today's day?
I need a couple of hours to answer this question. We have to look at history of inquiry for the last 5,000 years and what are the kind of changes that happened from Vedic ages to modern colonial system. And as I made one point, and that is that earlier days, only people, serious thinkers and seekers used to come for education. And the student used to seek education. So he seeks a teacher. And as most of you know, those days, the teachers were all hiding in Himalayas or forests. So even Lord Krishna had to seek his teacher, Sandipani. Today it is different. It has become a mass industry, you hold the entrance exam. So it is not the seeker, is not the student who has to take, it is the seat that he is seeking. And therefore, we have a perverted sense of all this. And therefore, this whole inquiry business, realizing whatever you are seeking, is a very intellectual exercise. So we have, therefore, the stakeholders that are now crowding this atmosphere, higher education or lower education, are basic student, teachers, parents, everybody. They all are stakeholders. They have messed up the whole thing. So what we are doing here, without any ethics, without any aim, without any noble goal. And that is the reason why what actually happened is it is for getting jobs. Therefore, middle class has dominated Indian education system, Indian research system. Earlier, they were also good because the salaries were very low. They had ideals to pursue. But today it is not. All of us are over pampered with high salaries. The 7th Pay Commission has made us enormously rich. Good. I'm not saying I don't want salary. All I'm saying is all these factors has made this enterprise, science, education in general, as purely a business enterprise, lacking any ideals. With this result, with the number of awards and recognition that are there plenty in our society, because one of the characteristic feature of middle class is you want somebody to say good, approve, sabash. Even if you commit a murder, somebody should say you have done a good thing. Then only he is happy. And that has created this dichotomy and the lowering of standards and introduction of unethical things. So, conclusion, we have messed up the very purpose of education. If you read the original aim of education, to increase the consciousness of an individual seeker to its highest potential. Read Upanishads, you will see what is the meaning of education. I don't know whether I answered your question.
I think so. It's a lot of material to think about. Can we now ask Jyoti Jha to ask a question?
Hello, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you
Yeah.
are.
Very good afternoon, sir. I am Jyoti Jha from 3rd year Geology Honors. Sir, it's an honor to attend such an interactive talk session. And my question is like, you have talked about the conflict of interest. So my question is, does the policy of conflict of interest only applies to the tufts of the employees, or it also apply for the unpaid advisors and mentors?
Absolutely, you are right. See, conflict of interest is something which is tells you about the human behavior. So whether you are a vice chancellor who is selecting faculty, or a head of the department who is helping that recruitment, or a director of an institute who is recruiting scientists, or awarding somebody first class, second class, third class, or giving a medal in a sports, if you don't understand what is the meaning of conflict of interest, I will always appoint my brother-in-law as the next professor. That is conflict of interest.
Okay, does that answer your question, Jyoti?
One has to be very careful. If you see the funding agencies, how they work, the committees themselves are feeding themselves with funds. This is atrocious behavior, because we have not taught ethical behavior to all these people who are sitting in funding agency committees. That is the reason why we have problems. Many areas of India, they don't get any funds. Please remember, 95% of UGC funds goes to, at one time, 5 central universities. And there are 200 state universities which are starved of funds. Why do you do all these things? Because we don't have ethical guidelines. That's why I made this title. There is ethics in all this science or research or education or anywhere. And that is the problem. Conflict of interest is also an ethical principle. One should avoid this.
Thank you. We have a last question, and then I have a few things to ask you, Professor. And then we go on to the next presenter. Prasansa, what question do you have? Thank you, Jyoti.
So am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, Professor Muralidhar. It was really amazing listening to you speak. And my question to you is, so you talked about how awards and all these things can actually drive people in a negative manner. And I just wanted to ask what you think would be a healthy or a good way to motivate people towards the sciences, because I feel like those awards exist for those things, to incentivize people to move towards higher education or to push them for research. So what other ways do you propose can exist for the same, which can be better for the entire community?
See, advising is very easy. All of you know what is the solution. Everybody knows the problems, everybody knows the solution. You understand? So you start with appointing good teachers who are committed, who are scholarly. When a university disrespects scholarship, that is the end. What you call experience is putrefaction. So start learning, respecting teachers, respecting scholars, then everything else will come. Students are all mischievous by nature. What do you expect a young kid, adolescent kid? So it is your job to train them properly and introduce all these things. So there is, see, the system has gone bad, so bad. Everybody can give advice. I can also give advice. The whole point is, unless you are in the implementing agency, your advice has no meaning. That is the problem.
Okay.
Every Education Commission has come out with solutions.
We are falling short of time.
Recommendations are followed. Nobody is following.
Rashmita, can we wait? Because we are falling short of time. I have a few questions to ask and then we'll go on to, you can type your question in the chat box, Rashmita, so that Professor can see it and maybe he can respond to it. Professor Muralidhar, I have a few differences of opinion with you, if I may.
Sure, sir.
My first difference of opinion is your last statement that you make, the students are very shrewd and clever. I have been educated to think to the contrary. Students are students, and it is not a very, it won't be very ethical to consider students as badmashis before you even begin to know them. My second contention to you is that I also teach design students and architecture students. And I hear from them that design is basically a problem-solving discipline. And from the history of science, I learned that science is really concerned with production of knowledge and not really with solving problems. And my third contention to you is, while it is true that the system is absolutely poor, I have no difference of opinion with you on that. I also agree with you that there is a whole lot of irresponsibility going on. But in the midst of this, कीचड़ में कमल कैसे निकलेगा? What would be, how do scientists, I mean, for example, science cannot be free of capital today, right?
Yeah.
Now, the moment you bring in capital, you bring in many more factors which are unscientific.
Correct.
So how do you want to then pursue science with a burden of capital on your shoulders?
You're absolutely right. But then you need a rethinking on the way we train scientists in the PhD career, in MSc and all that. One should emphasize originality. One should think of innovative solutions to lack of infrastructure. We should tackle problems which are not initiated by the Western world. Their priorities are different. So if you do that, and you can take a grand example of Sir C.V. Raman, who worked in Calcutta in a very poorly infrastructure containing lab and won a Nobel Prize. He didn't have a spectrophotometer. He used sunlight as a source of light. What I'm saying is, every one of us should think and not start with a research career where the first thing is give a shopping list to the funding agency. I want to buy this, I want to buy 100 computers, I want to buy HPLC, I want to buy all these things. And ultimately it will become a museum collecting dust.
I totally agree with you, but maybe the fault lies with thinking of students as badmashis to begin with. Maybe you should rethink this proposition.
Maybe.
It's a little too harsh on yourself, not on students. You are being harsh on yourself when you make this proposition about students, because ultimately students, we are a reflection of students.
Absolutely.
So
You are right.
we shouldn't be harsh on ourselves. I think this discussion can go on endlessly. Thank you very much, Professor Muralidhar.
Thank you, sir.
Very, very grateful to you. I will certainly read the books that you have recommended to us, and I recommend everyone else to read the books also. Could we now go on to the next speaker?
Thank you.
Very much. Grateful indeed, Professor Muralidhar.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, Manosh. How are you?
Can I go off?
Yes, you please. Yes, you can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Finally, it has ended.
Manosh, you are on mute. Could you unmute yourself?
Manosh, we can't hear you.
Yes. Hello, Professor. So this
Hello,
is
Professor Manosh. We've been
outstanding way to see you for the first time. I mean, on screen. Obviously.
Thank you very much. It's been nice to talk to you on WhatsApp, but very nice to see you on face. Well, we have now Professor Manosh with us, and he's going to be talking about academia and regimes on the unpreparedness of scholars in understanding neoliberal actors. We got a little brief profile of what unpreparedness actually means when Professor Muralidhar was describing to us how the system is completely decayed and irresponsible to the enterprise of science. We hope to learn more of this from a social anthropologist, and we hope to supplement and complement and critique perhaps Professor Muralidhar's views. Manosh, over to you. We have half an hour, and then we'll have half an hour of questions after that. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Professor, for inviting me in this session. And this is an interesting experience to see Professor Saachi in this manner. I mean, of course, we were in touch on and off, and that was the most exciting way to see you. I mean, once again. And thanks to the Maitri College authority to keep faith on me, on my capacity of bringing some issues. And to the audience, I must say that I'm not the best speaker when it comes to English medium, but saying so, it's always easier to read out some written things, and I'm not that much organized as well, so I couldn't actually write many words to read out. So, I mean, on your generosity for accepting a speaker from not so, from not so good English background, I was a little late to log on to this session, and I was mesmerizingly listening to Professor Muralidhar, and it should have been something remote, considering the subject matter that he is into, but he sounded so familiar, so obvious. I mean, the kind of structure that we are all perhaps working with or operating within. So actually, listening to his lecture made me kind of feeling more sad, to be honest. I mean, India has been one of the largest educational nation. That's how it is being told, and that's on papers that is like that. And you all are this way or that experiencing a kind of a situation that is unprecedented. I mean, call it the kind of management, call it kind of the interference from the state authorities and all these issues, and more so with the parameters, the academic parameters that are being made to to pinpoint the excellence in academia. And in most of the time, more often than not, these parameters do work against the local scholars. I mean, their upbringing, their kind of contracts that they're having with the universities, their expressions and manifestations of academic excellence on different forums in different institutions. So this way or that, we are in a similar situation coming from Bangladeshi from a Bangladeshi public university. But now these days, most of the state authorities do like it be named as government university. You do know the shift in this kind of political vocabularies when public universities are being named as government universities, and that's how the government officials are comfortable with in these days. So my lecture, I mean, I don't have anything to show you, so it's all about what I say. Perhaps some job from the technical staff is, I mean, can be minimized. So coming from that issue, that the academia and the regimes and the underpreparedness of the academics, of the scholars understanding new liberal actors. I won't go much into new liberal actors because it's so much talked about. It has its own perils of discussing more and more on who are the neoliberal actors. It's more kind of assumed. My lecture comes from the understanding that many academics around we work with, both in public universities and in Dhaka city in particular, in the private universities as well, the kind of surprise, or rather kind of bewilderedness they show about how
Your voice is cracking, Manosh. Pratiti, his voice is cracking.
Yes, sir. I think Manosh has some internet issue, because at this side we have connectivity.
Okay. Manosh, we can't hear you. Maybe you have to switch off and come in again.
I think he will join again
Yeah,
after
I think
switching
so.
off.
perhaps I was disconnected.
Yes, you
yes.
disconnected for some time.
Yeah, I am having very much trouble here, but I mean, I'm sorry for that, but it's not helping for last 2 days, even with the data. I mean, the mobile data even. So from that end, may I continue, Professor Subhrachi?
Yes, please.
So I was for last 2-3 years, I was investing into the kind of the surprise or the off-guarded responses from the liberal arts and social science professors about understanding, or rather about non-understanding the structure they are living with, the government structure. In a nutshell, the expressions are like, well, we are having a democratic government and we shouldn't have this problem. I mean, this is a simplest version of their bewilderness. But saying so, this has some kind of axioms and theoretical premises that the current regime, the word mostly is not used by these professors, because you do know that the regime should refer to kind of to the negative connotations, and most of the professors do restrain themselves in using this.
Manosh, it might help if you go off the video, because your voice is again cracking.
So
if you switch off your camera, your voice might be clearer.
Of course, in Bangladesh, it's always easier to find examples from the other nations that is risk-free, but
He's gone off again. Maybe somebody should advise him to switch off the video and then just talk. Can somebody send him a message? Pratiti or
Yes, sir. We are just sending him a message to switch off his video and maybe join us.
Yeah, just with the audio.
With the audio, yeah, right. Professor Choudhury, maybe you could just switch off your video and join us with the audio. Then we might be able to hear you. Okay, I'll just call him.
Yeah. Maybe you should call him and talk to him. He's not.
Yes, we are doing.
Actually, it's
Manosh, can you switch off the video and then talk?
well, I'm trying that. It's so embarrassing.
No,
It's
the
not
problem.
working for last 2 days.
That's okay. This is part of technology.
I'm sorry to the audience and to the chair, but last 2 days, actually, we are suffering, I mean, like hell. I mean, no mobile data, and nobody is addressing even. I mean, this. So, am I audible now?
Yeah, you're audible. But my
I'm sorry for
switch off the video. You might not have the disturbance. Yeah, now talk. Maybe you'll have less disturbance.
So what is happening with these academics, that they, first of all, they are restraining themselves to use the word regime as it may refer to the negative connotations, and they are not willing to use any negative connotations to the current electoral government. So this is one aspect. Another aspect is that about the virtues of this current government. For example, in Bangladesh situation, it's about this government is, pro secularism, and this government is taking care of the avant-garde vanguard intellectuals, or they are for education. So these versions of portraying a particular government, if that is the right word, because perhaps we should be careful about a government doesn't necessarily represent a particular homogeneous body of political thinkers or political actors. So that should be another aspect of my lecture. But taking as its face value, a government is being portrayed by the academics in all the positive manners, and that's how the Bangladeshi current situation is working, unlike Indian situations in many ways. So the government is pro-secular, the government is pro-education, the government is pro-cultural activities, whatever that meant. But the point is that, so regime is not the word the academics choose to portray a particular government, hence Awami League in Bangladesh. And then the kind of bewilderness or awe comes that how could a government of this profile, of this stature, can do this or this, or again, I mean, the kind of the liberty or freedom, most of the buzzwords that are being told in academia or in press. In other words, for the last 5-6 years, Bangladesh is experiencing all the repressive laws, from Digital Security Act to, it was earlier called as Article 57. So it was shifted towards Digital Security Act, DSA. And partly because of the civil demonstration against 57, but more interestingly, DSA, as it is told, DSA has become even more repressive than the Article 57. Those are the technical terms from legal aspect, and both the press and the universities are severely monitored by these laws. In a nutshell, that is how we are working in the university. Unlike India, the recruitment structure is not that much diminished, or rather contract-based appointment, as you are familiar in the Indian public universities. That is not still the case in Bangladesh, but of course recruitment itself is being mentioned as one of the most manipulative recruitment system in the public universities. I mean, in last 4 or 5 years, there is some account that is being told by the people, but not so harshly, more covertly. So my concern was why the academics are so comfortable with defining an electoral system as a democratic one. So reducing democracy into some electoral system, that is one aspect of my talk, and I am much critical about the broader expressions that are coming from the academics, especially the liberal arts and social science academics. I mean, that is obvious, because professors of history or political science or philosophy or literature or sociology or anthropology, social anthropology, and they are the people who are believed to have serious opinion on or a criticism about a structure that is being run. I mean, that is how the academics are believed. But the actual point is, it has become propagandist for years. I mean, 4 years, like it said, 10 to 15 years, that we can see the academics are not mostly criticizing any aspect of the state structure. I'm not referring to the government only. I mean, by government, I should elaborate why I don't see government as I mean, nobody should see a government as a homogeneous body of political actors and political thinkers. So the government or the state machine should include overt business tycoons too, in Bangladeshi situation, perhaps military headquarters who are seriously involved in trades and commerces for last few years, partly overtly, but mostly now in public. I mean, they do have their own businesses and that are public now. And the academics are not comfortable mentioning these factors. They repeatedly refer to the very fact that if the government is fairly elected or not, and that's the discourse the liberal arts and social science professors, and in a way who are called as progressive journalists, I mean, they are discussing about the character of a particular poll, and if the poll is free and fair. I mean, that's the discourse in academics and in journalistic practices. And problem with free and fair election is that in Bangladeshi scenario, it's only it includes the question, only the question of if the major political parties are taking part in that election. Some of you may know that in Bangladeshi elections, Bangladesh Nationalist Party, BNP, led by Begum Khaleda Zia now these days, they are not participating in last perhaps three national election, perhaps 9, 8, 13, and 18. They are not participating in the national polls. So even in the international news agencies, the idea of a free and fair election is whether the opposition party is taking part in the election. And of course, on that aspect, Bangladeshi current regime, or rather current government, failed to invite, or rather to involve BNP, the opposition party, or is believed to be the second largest party, if not the first one. And of course, they were the first, in terms of popularity, they were the first political party for long, and then they are believed to be the second largest political party in bourgeois atmosphere. And they are not taking part in the election. So always the discourse of free and fair election is in trouble, and some of the government, spokesperson, especially perhaps the paid ones, or rather the employed ones, they are always making points about how they tried hard to involve BNP in the national polls. So this is where the whole discussion, even by the academics, are rotating around. If BNP was right not to take part in the election or national poll, or if the government or Awami League took enough initiatives to make BNP, take part in the national poll. My argument would be the whole discussion is pre-scripted, or rather guided towards the quality of a national poll, and on the assumption that a free and fair election could be the sole solution of a desired democracy. And I think this is not unique in Bangladeshi situation. Unlike India, the secular progressive, as they are told, within quote, the secular progressive academics and thinkers, journalists, they might think of a situation where the current government in India, could feel short of the parameters the vanguard secular progressive intellectuals and academics set. But in Bangladeshi context, officially, it's a secular government, and most of the academics are
Manosh, we lost you.
comfortable with the label or banner government, without much proof. Perhaps the kind of shock, or rather kind of underpreparedness that the academics do show, I could propose a few things. Many scholars warned us before not to confuse economic globalization with the cultural ones, the globalization processes. And not surprisingly, the economists, many economists preferred to analyze the economic globalization, throughout the last few years, last 2 decades or more. And many cultural anthropologists, including some other disciplines, historians and gender studies experts, they were much into the cultural globalization aspects or so. Not to confuse the economic globalization with the cultural ones is kind of a superficial call from anyone. But of course, there are the scholars like Arif Dirlik, who warned us that the globalization of the economic globalization started long before some of us actually think of. Even back in the 16th century, when the European traders started, conquering the whole world. But until very recently, last 4 or 5 decades, the cultural globalization took so much attention, by the global academics from the South in general. The one aspect is that the political scientists or the historians or the social anthropologists, sociologists, they do tend to analyze the cultural globalization aspect and often miss how the modern state, for example, in Bangladesh, are being run. So in the hindsight, the struggles or the tensions between the actors are visibly seen in India or in Bangladesh. For example, for last 2-3 years, the current regime or the prime minister is being criticized, of course, by only a handful of people, and very softly, because of the repressive laws, that she is doing under table relationship with the Islamist people. Saying so, my point is not that the educational curriculum or the policies shouldn't be consulted with the Islamists. I am coming from very different angle. I don't have anything against anyone. I mean to say, dialogues are something that I see as revealing and actually revealing, and can be done with many people without any moral pressure. But the point is that keeping a face with a secularist, secularist attire, and doing the things that is more popular to a much diverse population in Bangladesh. That is a tricky politics to get done on papers. So the academics actually don't know how to see the undercurrent ties and alliances between the commerce or commerce sectors who are actually dealing the properties or resources and doing the business both overground and underground. So often they do feel surprised, I mean, how this government can do that. Perhaps one way to deal with the situation we are into, to not to believe anymore about the discourses or the axioms or the parameters that are being told for years about what a democratic state should look like. Democracy perhaps has nothing to do, of course, with the electoral system or the mediascapic representation as it achieves at points. For my Indian audience, I mean the Indian counterparts that are taking that this seminar is mostly addressing, they do know how it could feel to have a president from the other religion, or a president from what the Indian state comfortably defines as tribal community, or a president from lower caste. And not surprisingly, the current government in India did all this. I mean, president from Muslim, president from what Indian government defines as tribal community, and president from non-caste Hindus. So we are in a situation where we need to actually unpack this kind of representational acts, both within parliament and beyond, both within the mediascape and in the undercurrent social activities. So these are the motives that can really confuse the scholars. And in Bangladesh's situation, the plane where a supposedly secular government is working in its favor, that they are having the jhanda, they are having the secularist mission for these 3, 4, 5 decades since Ayub, and they are taking care of the.
Manosh, another 5 minutes for you.
Yeah, I can conclude that.
Yeah.
So one aspect of looking into this situation is to unlearn the parameters that are being set for years in the, not only in the political science textbooks, but in the political discussions and the popular discursive field that engage the presses, the professors, their everyday discussions, by the the cultural avant-garde, and the popular discourse that are being used to define a particular government, in my word, regime. So we can go beyond the parameters that are being set for how a democratic government should look like, and perhaps we should look more into the undercurrent economic ties that are prevalent in the modern days. And from that aspect, I would propose, not a unique one, but I would propose to view government as a stake, a more kind of a office bearer to make things happen. They are the signatory of the culture and identity. So modern nation state their playing ground is culture and identity and they are doing from mediascape to to educational curriculum, or rather pedagogical realm. So from pedagogical realm to mediascape, the public discourses, everything, mostly the governmental bodies or the regime is working on culture and or identity, and the conflicts and alliances are about culture and identity. If economics should be separated from that, there is some area that is being taken, I mean, that is altogether in the hands of different actors that many of the academics are not familiar with, they're not even concerns of. So my final proposition would be that academics should go beyond this culture and identity projects that the governments are taking care, and it's a battleground. I mean, huge battleground. In India, it's different. In Bangladesh, it's different. But we do know the cultural battleground of identity and all these politics. But the actual ties, the ties that actually govern the resources and the restructure, the whole class structure, and the global businesses took place in the last few years. Many of the academics are not even concerned of the actual ties that are taking place undercurrent, and hence we are in a shock of defining a particular government. For example, the government that is running Bangladeshi state, they don't have the clue why a government is doing that or that. But these answers should come from the other ends and not on the culture and identity front. And that was my proposition, or rather proposal. And I am open for the audience. And I'm sorry for the disruption of this. It took a toll on me as well.
That's okay, Manosh. Thank you very much. I mean, we have to learn to live with technological glitches as long as we are online. Before I open up the discussion, can I request some people to come on screen? It is very, very demotivating just to see names and photographs.
Ghostly.
Please, some people can come on screen. Can I request some more people to come on screen other than me and the speaker? Dotiti, Gopi, Kaveri, Meenakshi, Sanju, I'm just randomly reading names. Yukti, Preeti, Ankita, some of you, please come on screen. Thank you very much, Jyoti. It makes us feel a little more human. And both of you can come on the screen, Gopi and Dotiti. It makes.
Yeah, sure, sir. Come.
Okay, so nice to have Jyoti. Where have you got lost? Dr. Jyoti Singh.
Hi.
Okay, the floor is open for discussion. Students, please speak up. Hello, Meena.
Hello, sir.
Hello, Gopi, Brotuti, and I don't know.
Ritika, we have a first question from Ritika Choudhury. Yes, Ritika, please come on screen as well.
I'm so sorry, sir. I cannot, start my camera.
That's
I'm so sorry.
Please ask your question.
Hello, everyone can open camera.
Please ask your question, Ritika.
Good afternoon, sir. My question is that when it comes to Digital Security Act, which you have discussed, do you believe it fosters a culture of worry? And if so, does it endanger free speech and ultimately have an impact on the democratic system as well?
Yeah, we'll take a few questions, Manosh, so that you have something to think about. Anyone else who wants to go? Yes, Oshvi. Thank you for coming on screen, please. Oshvi, yes, please.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible, Oshvi.
So my question is, how significant are the institutional experiences of Bangladeshi professors in the universities of democratic India? Thank you.
And we take a third one for now, Bharti. Bharti Bansal.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah.
Yes. Good afternoon, sir. Is so what is the role of culture and identity in terms of wisdom and academia in Bangladesh? Thank you.
Okay, so 3 questions for you, Manosh. Over to you.
Well, Ritika told about culture of bullying. Am I right, Ritika?
Ritika, you want to confirm your question?
Culture of?
Yes, sir. I asked that when it comes to Digital Security Act that you discussed, do you believe it fosters a culture of worry? And if it does, then how does it endanger free speech and ultimately have an impact on the democratic system?
Okay, continue. Yes,
Well,
ma'am.
actually, first of all, assuming that we did have a democratic system, that is, I mean, I'm not that scholar that who believe that before DSA there was a democratic system. And to be honest, Ritika, I am not a good advocate for the free speech as it is being told in the European and academics and media. I mean, they do have their own demons to battle against, and most of the time they don't even know that. For example, I mean, in Norwegian situation, you don't question the monarchy, and so there are the limits of what they call as free speech. So taking that, I mean, that is where I'm coming from. I don't believe that even before DSA, there was any kind of democratic structure that could be, that could be dependent, or rather that could feel dependable. And I don't believe the way the European nations do advocate for free speech. I do see the loopholes in their claims in many aspects. But the point is that DSA made it utmost dangerous because of the fact, for example, you can't even believe, I mean, even our Pakistani counterparts would get shocked that Bangladeshi presses actually is void of cartoons for last 3-4 years, even though the cartoon presses were not much critical about, for example, ethnic relationship, class relationship, and in some way gender even. Of course, we did have some gender movement, and we did found some caricature on gender relations. Saying so, the national dailies didn't publish many caricatures on or about ethnic relationship, class relationship, or rather gender. I mean, most common disparities I'm referring to. So even those were...
Manosh, can I make a request to you brief so that
Please.
you can address all and we can get some more questions?
Okay. So actually, I think that DSA actually made the professors and the journalists more fearful, and to that extent, the daily newspapers are void of caricatures for last 2-3 years. So this is how it works. It is more dangerous than the previous ones, or rather, the fear is more acute than the previous years, and that's how it works. To Ashvi's question, Professor, can I have the question again?
Ashvi, can you repeat your question?
Yes. So my question is, how significant are the institutional experiences of Bangladeshi professors in the universities of democracy?
Well, that was a brilliant question. I thought that time as well. Hopefully, some other Demotri college would invite me for a longer discussion. Actually, the Bangladeshi government is smart enough to make any regime envious. I mean, for example, in every classical or rather orthodox districts, I mean, Bangladesh is a small country in terms of area. So all the new districts, so it was 19 colonial districts and now 64 districts. The government is making public universities, well, they call it government universities. For the last few years, they are establishing universities in almost every district. It should sound great, no? But the point is that with some critical understanding, you could see it's all about, at least from my opinion, it's all about restructuring the class structure, and has nothing to do with education. I mean, on record, I'm telling this. It is a mission of restructuring the class structure, or rather reconfiguring the class structure. I mean, social class structure, and has nothing to do with education. All these universities, most of them are being named as science and technology university and lacks a proper laboratory even. So this is a very new situation and almost inexplicable. I mean, the kind of, the kind of intensity the government is brings to the table, because people are happy because we do have the university. So experience of doing it in a fortunately, and of course, luckily, I am working one of those old universities. I mean, in Bangladesh, old university, like 50 years. So 4 universities are kind of unwritten. They do have the status of being the, the big brother kind of university. Dhaka University, Jahangirnagar University, the university I work at, Chattogram University, and Russian University. So they are kind of having kind of some kind of pride. But all the other universities that are being established during last 6, 7, 8 years, it is merely about 2-3 buildings and a signboard, and of course 200 faculty members, and completely restructuring of the older college. So Oshi, I may not be the, I may might not do justice to your question, but this is a huge thing and very smart move, and to restructure the whole academic structure as well as the social class structure. For a person like me, it is very disturbing, to say the least.
Good. Thank you very much, Manosh. You can go to next question asked by
Bharti, I am with the technological difficulties, I am much dull than any other day. So would you please repeat again?
Yeah, sir. So my question is, like, what is the role of culture and identity in terms of regime and academia, in Bangladesh perspective?
Well, Bangladesh is a fascinating example for that. For example, during India, I mean, you can, I will take 1 minute. For example, anytime, don't get me wrong, we are from the academics and it has nothing to do with our national identity. For example, the first time, perhaps 1991, whenever, Bharatiya Janata Party came into power, the people associated them with the religiosity and religious identity. They went on saying even the, the kind of the Paddo taken from the religious motive. Interestingly, Bharti, nobody mentioned that in context, even the Panja could read in that manner. You know what I mean? So it's in a particular juncture, what motives are being, analyzed. That is a serious question. Bangladeshi academics, or many of them, believe that secularism is something that can be protected only by Awami League. And that's where the main trick worked. Like, that is the parallel. The secularism in the only thing that secularism can be secured by the Congress party. For example, that's the parallel. Regardless if I do believe that or not. So the trick is that Awami League is believed to bear the torchlight of secularism if that is necessary, and the academics actually play a part in in propaganding this mission. Well, Awami League is the party who can bear the torch of secularism. So that's how identity here, I mean, it's a complicated one, because the ethnic minorities, I mean, like in Indian constitution, it should be said tribal, and now Bangladeshi government actually sanctioned us to call them ethnic minority, so, or Adivashi, or indigenous people, and now it's legally prohibited. So the ethnic minorities or Adivashi, of course, I am talking the legally prohibited term, they are not even in the issue, because Bangladesh is almost a mono, I mean, from the government perspective, it's a monolingual, monoethnic nation. So the question of identity is mostly rotated around secularism and Islamism. And that's a huge trick that is taking part for last 2-3 decades in Bangladeshi politics, and the academics are playing as an advocate of the government as to be the only torchbearer of secularism. That's how it works, Bharti. I mean, did I make my point clear?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. It's very
Okay, we'll have to wind this session up because I think we're already late. The next session begins at 2:15 and we're already 1:59. I think everybody needs to go for a little bit of brunch and rest. So is that okay with Prof, Gopi and
Yes, yes, sir. I know it's a very interesting session, and even students really are, into it and asking questions. And I'm sure many more would have liked to interact. But we have to start our next session shortly. So I
have 2 small requests.
Yeah, sure.
One is that my email is open, at least to Gopi, Brototi, and some others. So please feel free to circulate that if someone, because this is an interesting issue for me as well. So I would attend any question that comes from my colleagues or students. And second, my today's performance should not be taken as my optimum level, because I was struggling, especially to my chair, Professor Saachi. I can do better.
I'm sure you can do better. We have no doubts on that. Not to worry on that front. Well, I had many things to ask you, but I'll leave that for another occasion. I think we
can have discussion. I would love that, Professor.
Yeah, we'll do that separately because I think we need to wind up now so for them to be on time for the next session, which is 2:50.
Yes, we have another session lined up at 2 o'clock with Mr. Sopan Joshi, who would be speaking about climate change.
So it's already 2 o'clock.
Yeah, we'll
so everybody can have their lunch and switch off the camera, and nobody would know.
That is the advantage of technology, I guess. And I would really like to thank Professor Savya Saachi for conducting this session, and for Professor Manosh Choudhury for being with us today. And thank you so much. And I hope that you all would be able to join us for the next sessions as well, and for future endeavors of Vantage also. Thank you, sir.
Tomorrow for sure. Sir. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Brototi.
Thank you. And I would now request the participants to not log out. Please stay connected, because we would soon start with the session of Mr. Sopan Joshi. And he's a journalist, and he'll be giving a very interesting talk on, why we fail to understand climate change. So please stay tuned, and we'll shortly join again.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the last session of the day. Brochure, and this session is about climate change, and we know that the global climate is rapidly changing, and climate change has been a hot button issue for years. The latest scientific report submitted to the United Nations by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says that Earth's climate has changed in every region and across the whole climate system, and the role of human influence is undisputed. However, how much do we understand climate change, and do all of us have a role in it, is another pressing concern. To address this issue, we have with us Mr. Sopan Joshi, an eminent writer and independent journalist. He would be talking on explaining the unexplainable, the difficulties of discussing the climate change. Before he begins to pour in his thoughts and suggestions on climate change, I would like all of you to give a brief introduction about him. Mr. Sopan Joshi is a journalist and author in Delhi. He was born in 1973 in Indore, Madhya Pradesh. He completed his school education in Chandigarh, Delhi, and Dehradun, and graduated in English literature from University of Delhi in 1996. He has researched, written, and edited for a variety of publications in both English and Hindi over the past 25 years. He has reported on farmers and agriculture, forestry and water management, science and technology, indigenous peoples and societies. He has written on adventure and travel, sports and monitoring, religion and politics also. His journalism is driven by social values and a desire to better understand his people, society, and the environment. It has taken him across India and the world. He writes for children and designs training workshops on social communications. He is the author of 3 non-fiction titles in Hindi, that is the first of which was published in 2016 titled Jal Thal Mal. In 2017, another book, Ek Tha Mohan and Bapu Ki Pati in 2018. With this brief introduction, I now invite Mr. Joshi to start his talk. Sir.
Good afternoon to all of you. I hope the pictures and the sound is coming through okay.
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Is that okay? Yeah. Would you quickly brief me about how you'd like me to go? Because this is an endless topic and I wouldn't want to bore people who've joined here. I mean, I'm a journalist. I guess I should apologize among academics. That's a discredit. But one thing that journalists are not allowed to do is bore other people. So just let me know the time limit and I'll stick to that.
Sir, you have half an hour.
Half an hour?
Yeah,
Okay.
half an hour. And then followed
so it's
by
2:20.
15 minutes of interaction.
Okay, it's 2:20 right now. I'll stop
Yeah.
at 2:50.
Yeah,
Is that
sure,
okay?
sure. Yeah, sure. Perfectly okay.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody gathered on this virtual talk. This is a problem with our times that we do our meetings like this, where we don't get to see each other's faces, and you're talking essentially into a screen, into a wall. But we have to do with whatever our time allows. Climate change. Okay, I've reported on climate change for about 20-25 years, and but I never used to talk about it publicly. About 5-6 years ago, my first book had come out, and after that I had to go and deliver talks in public places like schools and colleges and other places, and then I realized I started meeting a lot of people, which I wasn't doing earlier. And I suddenly realized that a lot of people have questions about climate change and that there is actually no clarity. And then I remember this very clearly once, meeting a professor of environmental science in a university who had invited me for a talk. And then as we went on, I realized after a while that he did not have a basic understanding of what climate change was. And there he was teaching young people about environmental science. And yet he actually didn't know, he had no clue about the cause of climate change or what is climate change. After that, I made it a habit whenever I get into discussions on climate change to ask people about what is climate change. How is it to be fixed? And I've been surprised by the kind of people who know nothing about it. I've met very well-read people who have a very nuanced understanding of several subjects, who have researched their subject over many years, and who are very well-read, much better read than I am. And yet when you ask them about what is climate change, you get these general platitudes. It's nature out of balance, something is like this, something is like that. And when I started coming across these problems, I started finding out what is the experience of other people in the world who communicate on climate change. And I find that in the US, in Europe, they have actually invested a lot of effort into breaking down climate change for their people. But that doesn't happen in India. You just get these I get to hear these platitudes, like it has to do with the ozone layer, or it is about nature going out of balance. Now, first of all, nature doesn't, the first and the most important thing to remember here is nature does not function according to the human imagination. The human imagination has resulted from the natural world. But the human imagination is not capable of capturing the complexity of nature, right? There's a favorite author of mine called Frans de Waal, who has a book titled, "Are We Smart Enough to Understand How Smart Animals Are?" And that is pretty much how it is with climate change. Our imagination is highly limited. There is an old Sanskrit phrase, "Koop manduk," "Kuein ka mendak," or a frog in your own well. And all of us are frogs in our own wells. We have a limited understanding of the world, which comes from our limited exposure. And we form ideas based on that. And since the 80s, we have an increasing volume of environmental literature, environmental concern, because we can see things around us. We can see the state of the physical environment deteriorating. So how do we explain the climate? How do I do it? What I do these days is, the first mistake is that, how do you know about climate change? And people say, look, it is raining so late in the season, this is climate change. That's not climate change. That's weather. And there is a big difference between weather and the climate, as any scientist will tell you. And what is that difference? One way to see that is to think of calendars. And weather is like a stopwatch which measures a few minutes. Whereas climate is a big time frame and a big spatial frame. So that means this is things that are way beyond us. They are much bigger than us. And we cannot actually perceive them through our senses. So one metaphor that I use on this is, if you put your hand in hot water and you can feel the heat there, that is weather. It's what you feel. If you put your feet in cold water and you feel the chill, that's perception. Your skin is perceiving the temperature. But if I ask you what is the average temperature of your body, you will not be able to tell, unless you measure it with a thermometer. And that is climate. Climate is the average of relationships among biotic and abiotic systems on the planet. Just explaining that takes so long, right? It's the average of the relationship among biotic and abiotic systems on our planet. Now, how do you understand that? You can't. It's humanly impossible, which is why we need scientists to tell us what is climate change. And the weather anomalies or the changing patterns of weather that we see is not climate change. It is the effect of climate change. How does the Earth's atmosphere function? See, okay, climate change, another way of understanding climate change is, I remember asking myself this question many years ago when I was trying to familiarize myself with the negotiations that go on. And what's this argument about containing temperature rise within 1 or 1.5 degrees Celsius, or in the worst case scenario, 2 degrees Celsius? How does 1 degree Celsius make such a big difference? Because after all, I live in Delhi, and Delhi's temperature during the winter drops down to under 5 degrees. Sometimes the minimum temperature is close to 0 degrees Celsius. In the summer, it crosses 45 degrees Celsius. So if we have such a wide variation in temperature in Delhi, then what difference does a 2 degree Celsius rise make to the state of the Earth's climate. And one way to understand this is to ask yourself, what happens to you, to your body, when your body's temperature goes up 1 degree Celsius? Most of us can't function because 1 degree Celsius means you have a fever, which is over 100 degrees Celsius, right? And we need to take some medicines. We need to reduce the heat stress on the body, all manner of things, antipyretics, and this, that, and the other. What happens when your body temperature increases by 2 degrees Celsius? That's 104 and above. That's when you have to be hospitalized, or you have to be put in a water bath or an ice bath to make the temperature come down. That's what happens in your body when the temperature goes up 2 degrees. Now just imagine a system as complex and as large as the planet Earth. And you'll imagine, then you can begin to imagine what a slight variation in temperature does. Currently, the Earth's average temperature is 16 degrees Celsius. Now, what happens if, okay, so this is where I stop and I go back a little bit. We are all part of the solar system. So our sovereign is the sun. Everything depends on the sun. Almost all the energy that we have on this planet is actually solar energy. We ourselves are forms of solar energy. Everything is solar energy around us. And the greatest solar panels in the world are the trees, which have these green leaves, which can tap the sun, which can tap sunlight and turn it into sugar, photosynthesis. Now, if almost all the heat on the planet comes from the sun, we want this heat to remain on the planet. Because if all the heat that comes from the sun escapes the planet, then the Earth's average temperature will drop to minus 18 degrees Celsius. Everything will freeze. We don't want that. So we want a part of that heat to stay back on the planet. How does that happen? The Earth's heat budget is one of the most complex things to understand in physics. Climate science as such is very difficult because science relies on having a few constants to then determine a variable. Now, if I don't know the length of my phone, then I put it against a scale and I know that it is just under 15 centimeters long. This was a variable for me, this was a constant. Now, the difficulty with climate science is everything is a variable. And whatever influences the Earth's climate exists in 3 dimensions across the atmosphere and the land and the seas. So there is always a limitation on the amount of data we can have. Although data collection now is, it's shocking how much data we have, and good data at that. But even then, it's very limited when you see the scale of the Earth. Now, how do we know that that data is reliable? We know it because climate science was more or less clear by the 1980s. And the predictions that were made at that time, without that much data, have generally been true. It was predicted that the warming will be greater towards the poles than the equator, and that's true. The fundamentals of climate science that were figured out by the 1980s have held true, more or less. I mean, there is a variation. On some counts, there is it's much worse than what was anticipated. On some counts, not so much. Now, we are not going to get into the Earth's heat budget here, but essentially, the sun sends down as much heat in a day as the amount of total electricity all of humankind uses in 1 year. So that's the kind of energy that the sun is putting on our planet every day. But what happens is, at one point, only half the planet looks towards the sun. The heat that comes in with sunlight, when the planet turns around and faces the other way, it escapes into space as shortwave radiation, what's called infrared radiation. And that's how, see, if all the heat that comes in from the sun doesn't escape the earth, then everything will burn. So we want that heat to escape, but we don't want all heat to escape, because all the heat escaping would then drive our planet into an ice age. So we want that heat to stay, some heat to stay, but excessive heat to not remain. Now, the complexity of the Earth's heat budget is such that the land and the oceans do not have that critical a role in controlling the Earth's temperature. What controls it, at least in terms of the biosphere, is the atmosphere. And the atmosphere, 99% of our atmosphere, 78% is nitrogen, which is two atoms of nitrogen into a tight bond. It's N2, and it's a very stable chemical condition. It's a very stable bond that in which we find nitrogen in our atmosphere. It's not easy to break it, which is why getting urea is so expensive. Now, if you want to stop infrared radiation from escaping the Earth's atmosphere, nitrogen is not going to help you because it doesn't interfere with infrared radiation. Neither does oxygen, which comes in, the chemical form is O2, again, two atoms. The bonds are not as tight as nitrogen. Nitrogen is very stable, oxygen is not. But even oxygen doesn't react with infrared radiation. Remaining 1%, 0.96% is one gas called argon, which is monoatomic and a noble gas. Single atom, it is not going to interfere. Infrared radiation doesn't make any difference to it. So 99.96% of our atmosphere does not react to the infrared radiation that escapes the planet. So then what functions as the planet's thermostat? It is the remaining 0.04% carbon dioxide. Because carbon dioxide comes in, it's a long chain. It's one oxygen, it's one carbon and two oxygen molecules. Now, if you remember our school chemistry, I had to relearn all this. There are two branches of chemistry. There's organic chemistry and inorganic chemistry. The reason organic chemistry is a separate branch is carbon is a unique element. It has both the ability to combine with and react with a lot of other elements and form long chains. But then it can also stabilize, right? Typically, chemical compounds are either reactive or stable. Carbon is both reactive and stable. So a molecule of carbon dioxide, one carbon, two oxygens, if it's in the atmosphere, when infrared radiation is escaping the Earth's atmosphere, when it collides with carbon dioxide molecules, they vibrate and they dance. And this scatters a certain amount of heat back to the planet. And right through the planet's 4.5 billion year history, carbon dioxide has functioned as the thermostat. For about 15% of the Earth's history, the level of carbon dioxide or the level of aerial carbon has been lower than average. And that means 15% of the time in the Earth's history, there have been ice ages. 85% of the time, there has been excessive carbon dioxide. So there is no ice anywhere on the planet. Now this happens naturally, sure. So a lot of people say, oh, carbon dioxide is natural. So why are we bothered? We are bothered because first of all, we are not the first creatures to destroy ourselves with our own development. This has happened in the past. And the great dying that happened 252 million years ago. Each major mass extinction event in the Earth's history has a major climate change event associated with it. And what we are doing right now is, with our success, is we are destroying the balance that helped us become successful. So in nature, excessive success is like a recipe for failure. There is a limit to how successful you can be in nature, and that cannot be changed. Which is why it's always easier to talk to people who see the world either through faith or through evolutionary biology. Evolutionary biologists will tell you that humans did not create humans, that humans have resulted from millions of billions of years of evolution. Somebody who believes in their own personal God will tell you that whoever his or her deity is, they'll say that deity created the world. And both of them are closer to the truth than this mythical, political, utopian idea that we have, that we are in charge and we can control things. We cannot. There is a limit to our control. And we don't know where that limit lies because it's not measurable. And it does not come packaged neatly into a form that the human imagination can absorb. So if this is what is the reason for climate change? Very simple. There are just two things. There are many factors, but just two things are the most important: coal and petroleum. These are the largest reserves of carbon that we add. These are forests of the distant past, which got buried inside the earth and then decomposed into coal and petroleum and natural gas. We are digging them out, we are burning them, because that's what the Industrial Revolution is based on burning coal. We burn them to get energy. And when we burn them, we take out stored underground forms of carbon and we turn them into aerial carbon. This started, the history of climate change is about as old as the Industrial Revolution. It's not that one scientist got up and had this idea that, oh, this is climate change. It doesn't happen like that. The first, if you look at the history of climate change, it starts with Joseph Fourier's work on thermodynamics of gases in 1823. That's 199 years ago. That's where it starts. And slowly, scientists began to refine their ideas. They tested their hypotheses against existing reality. And that's how we know what we know, through literally thousands of scientists working on this problem. In 1896, a Swedish scientist called Svante Arrhenius finally created a tabletop contraption that showed how climate change works. And he was very happy because he lived in Sweden, and Sweden is a very cold country, as most of you will know. So they thought it's nice if the earth is getting warmer, their weather will improve. So for the longest time, it was believed that this is actually good, till the science began to pile up. And now it's obvious that the weird thing here is the worst effects of climate change will be felt in tropical areas where most of the world's poor countries are situated. These countries have very high reserves of biodiversity, and they have economic poverty. Now, the countries that are responsible mostly for climate change are Europe and America. And Russia, you can add to it, and Australia. Now, these countries have used up the Earth's atmospheric resources because they've emitted a lot of carbon. And the thing about atmospheric carbon is if you emit carbon today, you cannot take it out of the atmosphere tomorrow. It takes about 200 years for atmospheric carbon to go off, which is why if we don't do anything about climate change from now to say 2030, then it doesn't matter what we do. Because even if we reduce carbon emissions to zero after that, it'll take scores of years for the atmospheric carbon that we've already emitted to be reabsorbed in the biosphere. So that is the politics of, the first part was the science of climate change. The second part is the politics, and the politics is extremely difficult. I'll give you an example. When I told you earlier that by the 1980s, climate science was, actually it was clear by the 1970s. 1980s, they had the first clear predictions. In 1988, a scientist called James Hansen, who worked for NASA, and he worked, his PhD was on the runaway greenhouse effect on Venus. He gave a testimony to to the US Congress, where he described climate change. And that's the time everybody woke up. That's like a watershed year, 1988. And that was the year of the American election. Both the candidates announced that they would do their best to stop climate change. In his campaign speeches, the candidate who was to be elected the president of the US, George Bush Sr., said people who talk about the greenhouse effect do not know about the White House effect, and that once he's in power, he'll rally all the leaders in the world to stop this global problem. The moment he was elected, the first thing he did was to get NASA scientists to shut up. Because by that time, his advisors had told him, what is the meaning of dealing with climate change? It means you have to stop burning coal and petroleum, which means you have to slow down your economy because you haven't figured out a way to make your economy work without fossil fuels. So then George Bush Sr. became the biggest threat to any action against climate change. When he finally showed up in 1992 at the Rio summit in June, he announced to the world that he wasn't there to negotiate the American way of life. And the trouble with politics is a short-term game. It is about the next election. It is about a tactical engagement to get political power. Whenever it comes to things that have a strategic relevance or long-term relevance to everybody, where the power lobbies do not get to manipulate things, politics falls short. On anything to do with the environment, you'll see politics falls way short of what is needed. That's because the environment as such is very difficult for us to imagine. Besides, a river doesn't cast its votes. The atmosphere doesn't come to complain to us, which is why you see a lot of this moralizing messaging in all manner of environmental discussions, which is save the planet, save the atmosphere. You see that image of people holding the planet like this, which is ridiculous. I mean, it's an extension of how we see the world centered around us. We think we are the center of the universe, and somehow the planet is crying for help of us. Dealing with climate change is not about saving the planet. Dealing with climate change is about saving ourselves. Right? It is about having a world that remains habitable. And the biggest problem in handling climate change is getting people to imagine the scale of the problem. This is much bigger than anything our species has ever faced. And dealing with it requires the kind of resources that we haven't yet managed to find in our society, in our political systems, in our economic systems, more than anything else in our technological systems. It's about time. There's no harm in my stopping before 30 minutes, because this is a monologue. I don't even know how many people are listening to this or whether or not they're being able to comprehend. So yeah, I'll call time on my speech. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, sir, for a very, very informative lecture. I would now ask students to ask questions. If they have any, you can raise your hand so that we can unmute you and you can ask the question. Okay. Yes. Who has raised hand?
You can also type the question in the chat box if you'd like.
Yeah.
They can ask
if there are no questions, I'm very happy to. If there are no questions, I'm very happy to close this.
No, sir, we have questions. Students are very, eager to ask questions to you.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
It seems,
Good afternoon, sir.
Dr. Yadav, if I may say, there is another connection open somewhere close to you because there's an echo.
Yeah, there's an echo. We have just, closed it.
Please.
Yes, Rashmita, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon, sir. I wanted to ask is increasing population also a reason that we cannot control climate change? Because the more
I can answer this. I've already got your question. No, it isn't. There are lots of people living on this planet whose carbon footprint is much lower than a small number of people who consume a lot of resources. This is not about population only. This is about the resources you consume. An average American consumes 20 times as many resources as Indians do. And within India, I mean, forest dwellers, scheduled tribes, their carbon footprint is next to nothing as compared to someone living in Delhi or Bombay or Bangalore or Hyderabad, whose carbon footprint is much greater. So it's not about population.
Our next question, Kaveri, you want to ask? You can ask your question.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, I wanted to ask if you think that over the years, people have become more aware about the climate change or not, as compared to before.
I used to think so, but I don't think that's the case. I think earlier people didn't know, and now people are misinformed. So it's ignorance versus misinformation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Ayushi, we have, you can ask your question.
Sir, what is the difference between climate change and climate variability? I would like to know.
Climate change, see, like I said, these are terms we use to make it easy for our understanding.
Because as we say that climate is changing, but at some point, in some research paper, we see that
what is the meaning of climate variability?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing, right? Variability is what? It's change.
Mostly people use it as a same thing, but
see,
in
climate
some
variability, the term to use is climate change. What climate change is going to do to us is it's going to introduce a lot of uncertainty and a lot of variability in our lived experience. That is not climate change. That is an effect of climate change, right? If you were to come here and stab me and blood were to spurt out, the blood spurting out is a result of the stabbing. But blood can spurt out otherwise also. So the changes and the uncertainty that we encounter is resulting from climate change, but it is not climate change. Climate change, you cannot perceive climate change. It is beyond your senses. Okay, I'll give you a metaphor that I use with people. You know, in Indian philosophy, ancient Indian philosophy, there is that old debate between Sakar and Nirakar Brahman. You know, the divine as you can see and feel with your senses, and that which is beyond your senses. So then, you know, the Sakar Roop is if you pray to an idol. Nirakar is what you cannot see. As it is in, say, the Abrahamic tradition, in Judaism, in Christianity, and in Islam. They say God is unseen, God cannot be perceived. That's actually the difference. Weather is what you perceive. Climate is what is beyond your perception. You cannot perceive the climate. You know about it through measurements. Just like you can know that you're feeling hot, but you'll know your temperature only after you put a thermometer in your body. To understand the climate, we need a lot of thermometers. Weather is what we can feel.
Okay, I think that very clearly answers your question and even gives you more information than you asked for.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We have a next question from Dr. Sadhana Gupta. She is asking, what is the difference between climate change and climate justice?
See, climate keeps, just hold on. Because some people were asking about I'm trying to get you a fact sheet from NASA. which is very good in explaining the planet's heat budget. And I'll just paste it in the chat so that if anybody is interested, they can look it up. But it's very difficult, huh? You need to be very familiar with physics to figure this out. Okay, see, justice is a human idea. Justice is not a natural idea, which is why the term natural justice is a conceit. Nature doesn't function by our ideas of justice. The world wasn't created to fit neatly into our understanding. The world created us. We did not create the world. Justice is an idea that we have created. Climate change is beyond us. It is natural systems. They have their own way of going. So climate justice has to do with the fact that the countries that are most responsible for causing climate change do not have to suffer its worst effects. 4 countries in the world are most vulnerable to the effects of climate change, more than anybody else. That's India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and China. Because all these 4 countries have very densely populated population centers on the coasts. Right? And if you look at the history of climate change, okay, China is the largest emitter of carbon today. But if you look at historic emissions, which are still there in the atmosphere, China is not responsible for them. Neither are we. Right? It's Europe and the US. But they are not willing to take the hit. They're not willing to do what they need to do to lower carbon emissions. That is climate politics. And to get them to pay for the price of what they've done, that's the cause. I mean, that's what climate justice is about. But climate change is not something that you will understand through sociology or political science or history. Those are useful when you're looking at climate justice. To understand climate science, you need to stick with climate science.
Thank you, sir. The next question asks, what are your views on the United Nations Climate Change Conference held during all these years? Do you think they cause great impact in reducing climate change or global warming?
The first conference of parties that I attended and reported on was COP6 in the year 2000, which was 22 years ago. I've covered 2 COPs physically and then followed the other COPs as and when I needed to. And I can tell you that it's the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It's one of the 3 treaties that was signed in Rio. And that hasn't come through. Because what happens at these negotiations is all the countries send their most academically trained and gifted negotiators, people who've really read up economics and politics, and they're very sharp at negotiations. And they go there and they deliver these long lectures on how it is our joint responsibility to save the planet Earth, and it is our common heritage. And they'll talk like that. They say, but whatever has to be done, you should do it. We are not going to do it. Because handling climate change means putting a stop to development. There is no other way. There's simply no other way. All this talk about low carbon economic development, it's all ideas. There is nothing to actually go by. And there is no way out of this other than stopping coal and petroleum more than anything else. Right?
So your talk has indeed stimulated interest in the students, because I can see so many questions in the chat box, but we are now almost about the end of the session. So I'll just take one last question from Jyoti. If you can ask the question, Jyoti, you can unmute yourself and ask the question. Yes.
Ma'am, audible?
Yes.
Yeah, very good afternoon, sir. So this is a very nice to attend such an interactive session on such a hot topic like a climate change or a crisis. So my question is like, it's a normal question. Like, I want to know the climate change, isn't it is a natural process or a natural cycle? Because
No,
as
it
we
is
see
not.
development and all the things that happen to a country or a worldwide, I think it's a natural process
Okay, Jyoti, I already explained this earlier. I guess you weren't paying attention. I'll repeat it. The Earth's climate has been changing over and over. I explained all of that. I said 15% of the Earth's history has been under icehouse conditions and 85% is in greenhouse conditions. Okay, so the Earth's climate does keep changing. There is no doubt. There is also no doubt that what is happening right now is human cause. And it's caused, I mean, it actually started with agriculture when we began to cut down the forest and engage in large-scale agriculture. That began to influence climate change. But the really big upturn in atmospheric carbon is about a little more than 200 years ago with the beginning of the industrial age. And the reason is very simple. You burn coal and you burn petroleum. You take carbon out of the earth and you put it in the air. That's it. You try to understand climate change, it is very complex. You can spend a lifetime trying to understand it. But you want to understand the basics, it's the carbon cycle. It's got to do with burning fossil fuels. What is the way out? Stop burning fossil fuels.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very
It
much.
was
You're welcome.
actually indeed a very interactive session, and although we do have more questions, but we will have to end this session because sir has also told me so.
Listen, it's not a problem. I mean, if people have questions right now, I'll answer them for as long as you want.
Okay. So
it's got to do with your time limit.
Yes, sir. So we thank you for readily agreeing to join us today and making this a very interactive session. Although the topic climate change, every one of us know about it, read about it, but it is a very complex issue. But you addressed it in a very simple language for all of us to understand, as we all are stakeholders in it. We go back with a message that you spoke about, that is, dealing with climate change is not about saving the planet, it is about saving ourselves. So that is the biggest lesson that we all should keep in mind while talking about climate change or doing our bit to reduce it, to reduce the changing climate, decreasing the temperature and so on. So thank you very much, sir, again for your time and input. So before we end today's event, I wish a happy Rakhi to all of you, because it's the festivity today. You all can now celebrate, because we have to, sir, end the session because today is Rakhi, so people, they want to celebrate the festival. So we will now meet tomorrow at 10 a.m. With the same Zoom link, which it is same for all the 3 days. So again, a gentle reminder to all the participants that attendance is mandatory in all the sessions. So please join on time and don't forget to fill the feedback form for each session, because it will be considered as your attendance for that. So thank you, sir, and thank you all the participants for joining us in this session. See you all tomorrow at 10 a.m. Thank you so much.
Best wishes.
Thank you, sir.